Finally, we are fast approaching the witching hour of October, the great time where fiction blends with reality and the spooks and screams make themselves manifest. And since there is so little time before Hallows Eve, what better than to read a bunch of short stories? Now, this list of short stories that I'm about to recommend to you could be miles long. I love short stories. They feel so different to me than reading a longer form piece, and the style and the compactness and power of a short story when done well is like pumpkin spice to my brain. From the existential, if not problematic, Lovecraftian short stories to the great likes of Stephen King and Edgar Allan Poe, horror in the short form is so amazing to me. I've handpicked some short stories here. Some come from my own personal favorites, and a few I've only read for the first time this month, but all of them are great times. Let's start talking about some short form horror. First out the gate, it's a classic. It's Edgar Allan Poe's Cask of Amontillado. I don't think much needs to be said for the level of skill that Edgar Allan Poe expresses through language on the page. This was my first experience with my man's the notorious EAP way back yonder when I was in like 6th grade, and it was the big kickstart into my foray into horror literature. The beauty of the Italian carnival cut against this gruesome murder under the city, and the lovely Poe language all the way through really stuck with me. I recently argued with someone over if this was really a story of revenge, as the narrator wants us to believe, or if it was something more akin to jealousy. In the first line, we know that Montresor hasn't been affected by the 1,000 injuries before this. There are other hints and points of the story where it really feels like Montresor is more jealous of Fortunato than wanting to get revenge. You see it down all the way to the glee that Montresor is feeling when he's thinking about the downfall of Fortunato. What are your thoughts if you've read this story? And if you haven't read it, I implore you, if you're not gonna read any other Edgar Allan Poe, at least read this. Perhaps it'll inspire a hunger in you as it did me. The next on the list I read a long time ago, and it was only recently brought back to my attention thanks to a fellow booktuber. And I don't think there is a better time than a pandemic and a quarantine to read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This story was published in 1892 and is an outcry against the attitudes towards the health and the autonomy of women in the 19th century. The story follows a woman whose husband is also her doctor, and he has prescribed her with the treatment of solitary living. No socialization, no fresh air, no reading, no writing, no drawing, nothing. Nothing but staring at the yellow wallpaper of her room. The initial mental illness that she is clearly suffering from is some form of postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis, but her solitary confinement and the patterns in the walls begin to erode more at her psyche, and we as the reader follow that psyche spiraling down through diary entries that she has been sneaking. It's so well done. It's coming from a place of real, true events, and the idea that this was truly a treatment in the past is a bit more horrifying than the story itself, though it's an amazing read to experience that descent with the narrator. And now you too can read it while being solitarily confined in a room with nothing to look at but the wallpaper and the women hiding behind the patterns. So go check it out. This one's free on Project Gutenberg. I'll have links for everything down in the down there. Speaking of insanity, the next one on the list is one that, well, I'm just not quite certain is good for my own mental health when I read it, but still I'm gonna keep reading it. And that would be Transition Dreams by Greg Egan. This is a science fiction horror short story about a 107-year-old man in the future who is trying to transfer his brain to that of a robot so that he can continue living. In his interview process for this procedure, they warn him of transition dreams, which are 100% guaranteed to occur, but also equally guaranteed to not be remembered when you wake up in your new shiny robot body. These transition dreams are merely products of the robot brain sparking to life and the human brain's neurons making a last-ditch effort to fire off signals. Brushing completely past the horrific philosophical dilemmas of destroying a brain and recreating it in a robot and calling that the same person, this story delves into the spiraling horror. I guess on a different level could be the equivalent to the existential fear of living in a simulation. Are you experiencing a transition dream into your new shiny robot body? Or are you experiencing the simulated memories of your life in slow time as you take your last gasping breaths in 2097 or whatever? Everyone is scared of different things, so perhaps this is a lesser fear for many people, but this story is truly horrific to me, and the way that Greg Egan is able to craft this unthreading of a story as we fall into madness is beautiful in a very cool retro sci-fi future. I definitely recommend this story with the caveat that maybe if you think a little too much about being in a simulation, pass and go on and pick up the next short story I'm about to talk about. That short story being kind of cheaty, but I'm okay with that. I have not read, I don't think, any Ray Bradbury up to this point in my life, and I've always wanted to. I've just never picked up one of his books. So finally, I picked up a book of short stories by him called The October Country. And oh my god, do I love Ray Bradbury's writing style so much. His ability to craft a story without needing to craft a world around it, but that story still feeling concrete and real, was so impressive to me. This skill stuck out to me, particularly particularly in the short story The Scythe, which is a non-traditional horror, more a Sisyphean tale of dread that I love. The short story Skeleton is literally just that Tumblr meme. In every single person there hides a skeleton waiting to attack, but it touches on this idea with such literary prowess, and is to me both lighthearted and scary at the same time. This isn't a story that bothered me per se, though I could think of a particular person that this would actually be pretty scary for. However, I do think that that air of ridiculousness and lightheartedness elevated this story in a really interesting way. There are a ton of stories in this collection, and I don't think that there is a bad one in the group. But one of the weaker ones to me is Jack in the Box. This is the story where I'm guessing M. Night Shyamalan got a lot of inspiration for his movie The Village. The reader follows a boy whose mother has controlled all that he can experience in an echo of Plato's cave, but taking place in what I can only assume is a high-rise in a major city. The story felt weak to me because I felt the blocking of locations and where the boy was and actual surrounding descriptions were a bit weaker than I would have liked them to be for it to all make sense. It seems like the story wants us to slowly be revealed to these rooms and come to a conclusion on our own that he is locked in this area, that this entire thing is his world. And I could jump to that conclusion because I know this trope already, but I feel like this is a bit of a slower story that doesn't have as great of a payoff as I would like because of how common this story trope is nowadays. But the last and the best short story in the group, in my opinion, is Homecoming. This is The Munsters. This is Addams Family. This is Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School. This is Hotel Transylvania even. But it's done with the beauty and skill that Ray Bradbury possesses. And it's one of my favorite stories that I've ever read that fills me with Halloween vibes. About a boy who is our outsider character living in this family of immortals with superpowers. A family both of monsters and more humanoid people living mystique lifestyles as they prepare for their great Hallows Eve party. But our main character, unlike the rest of his family, is not immortal and he doesn't have any powers. And he just wants to fit in. This family that Ray Bradbury has created in this story, we see members of it earlier in this short story collection with Uncle Einar showing up. And it's a super fun read, 10 out of 10. If you like the Addams Family and the ideas behind that, go read this because this is what inspired a lot of those ideas. So there it is. Some of my favorite horror and pumpkin adjacent short stories that I think more people should read. If this inspired you to read some short stories, please hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't. And leave a comment on what your favorite short story for this time of year is. Thank you so much. I'll catch you in the next video. Stay lit.